I wish I could tell you the story starts with something quiet, a soft warning, a gut feeling, a whisper in the back of my mind. But the truth is uglier. The truth began with a scream I never let myself release. It began at my sister's gender reveal party, on a warm Saturday drenched in cheap pink and blue decorations and the kind of forced happiness that makes your skin feel too tight. The air smelled of grilled meat, fake excitement, and something else I couldn't name yet. Something rotten beneath the sweetness. I was standing in Lisa's backyard, surrounded by neighbors, coworkers, extended family, all glowing with the smug joy that comes easily to people who don't know their world is about to split open, when my sister pressed an ultrasound photo into my hand. She said my name like she was offering me a miracle. "Nina, look, isn't she beautiful?" She, her daughter, my niece, she believed. Lisa's smile was trembling from how hard she was trying to hold her excitement together. 37 years old, first pregnancy, finally getting the dream she'd wept for in private for more than a decade. She had spent years watching her friends have babies, hosting showers with brave smiles, crocheting tiny blankets she pretended were for future nieces. Everyone thought I was the strong one. Maybe I was. But in that moment, something inside me cracked. Because the second I looked at that ultrasound, everything in me went cold. Not worried. Not uncertain. Cold. Ice filling my lungs. Logic overriding hope. The trained part of me, the radiologist, who had read thousands of images, rose up and strangled every chance I had of lying to myself. Wrong shape. Wrong density. Solid where it should have been fluid. Everything was wrong. I forced my face into stillness, the same mask I've used with dying patients, distraught families, mothers I had to tell, "I'm so sorry, there's no heartbeat." But this was my sister, my little sister, and the truth sitting inside her abdomen was not a baby. My thumb trembled against the glossy print as I tucked it quickly face down into my palm. The party buzzed around me, shrieks of toddlers chasing bubbles, clinking cups, camera shutter sounds, but all of it sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. Lisa was glowing, truly glowing. Her brown hair braided down one side, confetti dusting her shoulders like spilled stardust. She had already begun talking to her belly in sing-song tones. She'd named the baby's future imaginary friends. She'd told me she could just feel her personality already. God, my stomach twisted so hard I nearly doubled over. But I swallowed the truth, like I've swallowed every unbearable thing in my life. I told myself, not here, not like this. Not in front of 50 people holding paper plates and plastic forks. Not in front of George, her husband, standing over the grill like a man guarding his kingdom, smiling every time his eyes drifted to her. Definitely not in front of our parents, hovering around Lisa like pregnancy had turned her into something fragile and precious and holy. I told myself I would wait. Wait until the right moment. Wait until I had proof. Even though proof was already burning a hole through the photo in my hand. "Nina?" Lisa bumped her shoulder into mine gently. "You're so quiet. Overwhelmed by all this cuteness?" Her laughter was silver bright, like bells. Innocent in a way the world almost never is by our age. I loved her for that softness. I hated the world for what it was about to do to her. "Just taking it in," I managed. My voice was steady, My pulse was not. I watched her float through the crowd, hand resting protectively over her belly, her smile wide enough to blind her to everything else. In that moment, Lisa looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, admiring the view, completely unaware the ground beneath her was crumbling, and I was the only one who saw the cracks. The party swirled on. People toasted with sparkling cider, someone blasted cheerful pop music from a speaker. Kids ran around with water balloons. The air shimmered with heat and lies. I kept touching the folded ultrasound in my pocket like it was radioactive. I refilled punch cups. I smiled mechanically at people asking how work was going. I let a neighbor corner me to explain her intuitive pregnancy moon readings, even though all I could hear was the roar of my own heartbeat. Every time I looked at Lisa, the dread inside me grew. She tilted her head while rubbing her belly as if listening for a secret only she could hear. I had seen hope make people hallucinate meaning before. Phantom kicks, imagined cravings, invented symptoms. I had seen women cling to the story they wanted so badly they ignored everything that contradicted it. But not my own sister. Not Lisa. My chest ached with the pressure of what I knew. Finally, I looked across the yard and found George. He was shutting off the grill, wiping his hands on a towel, glancing at Lisa with the same soft awe he had since the day they met. That man adored her. The kind of love you don't see often. Steady, quiet, deeply loyal. He deserved the truth too. But first, I needed him alone. "George," I called across the patio. He flashed a goofy grin from across the crowd. "Nina, you look like you need a break. Too much glitter?" I forced a small smile. "Can we talk? Now?" There must have been something strange in my tone. His face shifted, the grin dying at the edges. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Not here," I whispered. He didn't hesitate. He followed. We slipped inside through the back door and shut ourselves in the laundry room. The thumping music outside became a faint pulse, like a heartbeat I wished I could believe in. George looked anxious now. "Nina, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I inhaled slowly, chose my words with surgical precision. "It's the ultrasound," I said. He frowned. "What about it?" "It's not what it looks like." "What do you mean?" "It's the baby. Lisa's been—" "It's not a baby." My voice came out a whisper, a blade. George blinked, froze, and then the color drained from his face as if someone had pulled out the plug. No, Nina, come on. She felt kicks. She's been sick in the mornings. I know what she thinks she felt, but George, I've read thousands of scans. This one is wrong. The structure, the density, it's a mass, not a fetus." He gripped the edge of the washing machine so hard the metal groaned under his fingers. "You're sure?" he croaked. "Please tell me you're wrong." I wish I were. There was a countdown starting outside. 30, 29, 28. Someone was yelling, "Get ready for the balloon!" The party was seconds away from celebrating a child who didn't exist. George looked like he was about to throw up. "What do we do?" he asked, voice cracking. "We get her to the hospital tonight. Quietly, calmly. No panic, no crowd." He shook his head. "She's not going to leave. Not after today. She's been dreaming of this." "I know." I closed my eyes. My voice barely made it out. But whatever's inside her, it's not safe. A knock startled us. "Are you two hiding from the fun?" Mom's voice, cheerful and oblivious, drifted in through the door. "Lisa's cutting the cake." I opened the door with the best fake smile I've ever worn. "Just grabbing something," I chirped. Be right out." When she walked away, George whispered, "What do we tell her? She'll know something's wrong." I swallowed hard. "Tell her I'm sick. Tell her I need a ride. Whatever it takes." Outside, the countdown reached 0. The balloon exploded. Cheers erupted. Pink confetti drifted through the air like dying cherry blossoms. A girl. A daughter. A lie. We returned to the backyard. Lisa ran up to us. Pink confetti tingled in her hair. She was crying from joy, voice high and cracked. "Nina, George, you missed it. Our little girl, she—" Her glow was so bright it almost blinded me. I felt something inside me shatter. "Lisa," George said gently, "Nina's not feeling well. I'm going to take her to get something. I'll be back." Her smile faltered. "But the cake—" "I'll be quick," he promised, kissing her forehead. She pouted but hugged me anyway. Her round belly pressed softly against mine. I nearly crumbled. "Text me when you're better," she whispered. "I will." I lied. 10 minutes later, George's car rolled out of the neighborhood with both our lives unraveling behind it like smoke. I called Dr. Harper Lang on the way, one of the best OB imagers I knew. She heard the urgency in my voice and told me to bring Lisa straight in. Lisa arrived confused but trusting, still thinking George was just helping me. Even then, even terrified, she cared about me. God, that hurt more than anything. Inside the dim ultrasound room, the screen illuminated everything we feared. Not a fetus, not a heartbeat. A solid ovarian mass. Lisa stared at the monitor, her voice cracking open like glass. Where's my baby?" Harper's voice softened. "There is no baby." George dropped into a chair, face crumpling. Lisa didn't scream. She didn't faint. She folded silently, like someone gently collapsing a paper crane. And I stood there, hands shaking, throat burning, while the truth finally tore her world apart. I didn't sleep the night Lisa went home from the hospital. Not because I wasn't exhausted. I was. My bones felt waterlogged, my brain swollen from everything I'd seen and everything I still had to do. But the truth is, I couldn't sleep because I was terrified of silence. Silence was where the images came back. The soundless ultrasound screen. The mass, sitting inside her like a sealed secret. The way Lisa whispered, "Where's her heartbeat?" as if she already knew the answer, but needed someone else to tell her anyway. So instead of sleeping, I sat on my living room floor with my back against the couch, the lamp on low, the documents spread out in front of me like tarot cards. Reports, notes, printed screenshots, the beginnings of a war I hadn't yet declared. The world outside was dead quiet, except for the occasional car rolling past. I kept seeing the expression on George's face when everything broke. His eyes crumpling behind his glasses, his whole body collapsing into the chair like someone had unplugged him. I kept seeing Lisa's hand reaching for mine as they wheeled her into surgery, her voice barely a breath. "Don't let them get away with it." That sentence had embedded itself under my ribs. I didn't decide to go after the clinic. The decision made itself. It was the only thing that made sense. Because what did you do when someone you loved was hurt in a way that words couldn't repair? You did what I'd always done. You fought for them. You hunted the thing in the dark. You tore it apart so it couldn't hurt anyone else. At 3:14 a.m., I picked up my phone and pressed record. Not for a video, for a voice memo. Day 1. This is for when people tell me I'm overreacting, for when they pretend they didn't know. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. Lisa believed in a child. She loved something that was never real, and someone, multiple someones, took advantage of that. So if anyone tries to gaslight her later, if anyone claims she misunderstood, I want a record. My throat tightened. I'm going to burn them down. I ended the recording, exhaled slowly, and began organizing the first folder. The days that followed were a strange, suspended twilight. Lisa slept in fits, waking in tears. George moved like a ghost, his face pale with guilt he didn't deserve. I visited daily, sometimes bringing meals, sometimes just sitting quietly beside Lisa while the therapist, Elise, guided her through the raw edges of her grief. Grief for a child she'd never had. Grief for a future she'd held like glass until it shattered in her hands. Some nights she called me. Once she whispered, "Why did my body lie to me?" Another time, I felt her. I swear I felt her. And I told her the truth, because truth was the only thing she had left. Your brain believed you were pregnant. Your body responded. It happens. And none of this is your fault. But she didn't believe that yet. Not fully. One morning, about a week after her surgery, I knocked on her door and George answered. He looked drained, like he'd aged 5 years in a week. "He's in the bedroom," he said quietly. I walked down the hall and found Lisa sitting on the edge of her bed, holding the tiny yellow socks she'd bought weeks ago. She looked up at me, eyes hollow. They told me she was healthy. They told me she was perfect. How could they say that about that? Her voice cracked. I knelt in front of her. Because they didn't care who they hurt. Her grip tightened on the socks. Then make them care. That was the moment something solid snapped into place inside me. Not anger. Something colder, sharper. A promise forged in marrow. "I will," I said softly. And I meant it. The first few families I reached were hesitant. Some didn't want to revisit the trauma. Some didn't trust me. Some didn't want to believe they had also been lied to. But then the floodgates cracked, because trauma recognizes trauma. Jenna, the mother of the baby with congenital defects, sobbed through the phone. Lauren, the mother told she was carrying a boy when she delivered a girl, confessed she still felt like she'd betrayed her child by loving the wrong name. Amber described the night she nearly died from an ectopic pregnancy Nest and Bloom completely missed. "It should have been obvious," she whispered. "Anyone trained would have caught it. They told me everything was normal." By the 5th story, I had to stop and splash water on my face. The weight of it pressed down so hard, I thought my chest might cave in. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. A machine designed to exploit hope. Every woman I spoke to believed she was alone. Every couple believed they were the exception, the anomaly, the unlucky ones. They weren't. They were victims of the same smiling lie. And Lisa had been next in line. I created folders, stacks of them, organized by date, location, medical outcome. My desk looked like the wall of an investigator in a crime thriller, because that's exactly what this was, a crime. Only no one had treated it like one. Not yet. The first threat. It happened on a Wednesday night. I was sitting at my desk, half buried in paperwork, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Unknown. "Stop digging." I stared at the screen. Unknown. Nest and Bloom did nothing wrong. Let it go. My pulse thudded at the base of my skull. I typed slowly. "Me. Who is this?" No response. I screenshotted it immediately and added it to the evidence folder. Then I sat back and exhaled. Fear tried to crawl up my spine, but something colder pushed it down. Good, I thought. If they were threatening me, it meant they were scared. And scared people make mistakes. The next morning, I went to check on Lisa. When she didn't answer my knock, I let myself in using the spare key. The house was too quiet. "Lisa?" I called softly. Silence. My heart kicked. I found her sitting on the floor of the nursery, the one she'd painted soft sage green months ago, the one filled with furniture she no longer needed. She was ripping the wallpaper off the wall in strips, not angrily, just mechanically, as if peeling it back might reveal answers underneath. "Hey," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "You shouldn't be lifting your arms like that yet." She didn't look at me. "Nina, I don't know who I am anymore." I sat beside her. "You're my sister." She shook her head, tears sliding down her face. "I feel empty. I feel stupid, like I loved a ghost." My throat burned. "You loved what you believed was real. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human." She swallowed hard. "I don't want this room anymore." "Then it goes," I said. Her voice trembled. "Will you help me?" I nodded. We took everything apart, slowly, carefully, while George watched from the doorway, unable to speak. The crib came down, the mobile came down, the framed prints of baby animals came down. We packed everything into boxes. But when I lifted the tiny onesies from the drawer, Lisa's breath hitched, and she turned away. I held her. She cried into my shoulder for almost 10 minutes straight. And in those 10 minutes, I swore to myself that whatever it took, lawsuit, exposure, backlash, I wasn't stopping. Not until every person who lied to her answered for it. The day we went to the clinic with the investigators, the air smelled like rain. It was early morning, gray sky, heavy clouds, a kind of muted tension that matched exactly what I felt inside. The Nest in Bloom storefront was painted in soft pastels, mint and blush, like a toy shop. Cheery, innocent, a lie in architectural form. When we walked in, the receptionist, Candace herself, looked up with her trademark smile. The same smile she'd used to soothe dozens of women into trusting her. The investigators stepped forward. "Candace Doyle, this facility is operating without the necessary medical licensing, effective immediately." She sputtered, face twisting. "You can't do this. This is a family business. This is harmless." "Not harmless," I said quietly. She looked at me, recognition spreading through her face like rot. "You," she hissed. "You're the sister." I stepped closer, voice steady. "You told her she was carrying a healthy baby. She wasn't pregnant. She had a tumor the size of a grapefruit. Do you understand what that means?" Her mouth opened, closed. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know." Her eyes flicked to the cameras outside, Talia's crew, panic flooding her face. "You don't have to film this," she said desperately. "Please, this will ruin me." "Good," I said. And for the first time, I saw her smile vanish completely. That night, I sat with Lisa and George on their couch while the news played. They held hands so tightly, their knuckles whitened. When my interview aired, Lisa's breath stopped in her chest. There I was, standing outside the clinic, voice steady and low. Ultrasound isn't a photo shoot. It's medicine. And when untrained people pretend otherwise, they don't just give false hope, they destroy lives. Lisa covered her mouth. George whispered, "You did it." "No," I said softly. "We're just getting started." The trial. Courtrooms always smell the same. Stale paper and too much air conditioning. The trial stretched for months, and I sat behind Lisa every single day. Candace's attorney tried everything, calling Lisa confused, emotional, misled. It wasn't a medical facility, he argued. Clients knew that. But Lisa's voice cut through the courtroom with a quiet strength I hadn't heard from her since before everything fell apart. "They told me she had a heartbeat," she said. They handed me a picture and said she was perfect. I trusted them because they acted like they knew what they were doing. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. That lie almost killed me. Candace wouldn't look at her. Not once. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Lisa exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months, and I finally felt something inside me unclench. Justice wasn't enough to erase her pain, but it was enough to make sure no one else's sister would ever suffer the same. Justice is loud. Healing is quiet. After the trial, the world didn't magically brighten. Lisa still had nightmares. George still hovered gently, afraid to push, afraid to leave her alone. I still worked late into the night, unable to stop listening for cracks in the system that might swallow someone else whole. But slowly, the shadows eased. Lisa began walking in the mornings, baking again, talking more during therapy sessions. One afternoon, she laughed, actually laughed at something George said. The sound was small, but it felt like the first warm day after a brutal winter. I didn't realize how much I'd missed her laugh until that moment. And then, the call. It happened in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. I was at my desk at work, reviewing scans, when my phone buzzed. Lisa. I answered immediately. Hey, what's... Her voice trembled. Nina, can you come over? Of course, I said, already grabbing my bag. Is everything okay? A long pause. I think so. I need you here. I'm on my way. I drove faster than I should have. When I stepped into their house, George met me with red eyes, but he was smiling. In the living room, he said. I walked in and froze. Lisa was sitting on the couch, cradling a baby, a tiny girl wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, blinking at the room with the soft, curious stare of someone newly introduced to the world. Lisa looked up at me, her eyes shining, not with grief this time, but with something unbelievably gentle. This, she whispered, voice trembling, is Sophie. I felt something warm burst behind my ribs. We finalized the adoption this morning, she said. George sat beside her, eyes wet, one hand on his wife's back, the other touching the baby's tiny foot like she was made of glass. Lisa's voice cracked. I didn't think I could ever love again, but the moment I held her, Nina, I just knew. She's ours. She was always supposed to be ours. I knelt beside them and touched Sophie's tiny hand. She curled her fingers around mine, small, warm, impossibly real. Lisa leaned her head on my shoulder, and she whispered, You saved me. You saved all of this. For a long, quiet moment, the three of us sat there. Lisa, George, me, and the baby who would reshape their entire future. And I realized something. Truth hadn't ruined us. It had saved us. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a quiet hum of tension filling the air. Candace Doyle sat at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, hands folded tightly. She looked smaller than I remembered in the ultrasound studio, the theater of lies that had stolen months of Lisa's life. But her eyes still glinted with the same sharpness that had terrified me in those early days. I sat beside Lisa, holding her hand, squeezing just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. George hovered behind us, tense but steady, the man who had carried the weight of unspoken fear for weeks. I could see in his face the same relief that hadn't yet reached Lisa. She was fragile, still reeling from the weeks of trauma, from the uncertainty of what could have been lost, from the betrayal of trusting that the world could be safe. The judge's gavel hit the bench and silence fell like a blanket over everyone present. Ms. Doyle, the judge began, after reviewing the evidence, testimonies, and expert opinions, This court finds you guilty of gross negligence, misrepresentation, and operating without the proper licenses in violation of state health regulations. You are hereby prohibited from practicing or operating any health-related business. Furthermore, restitution shall be made to all affected parties, and you will serve a term of probation under supervision. Court is adjourned. A soft gasp escaped Lisa. Her body relaxed slightly, like the world had shifted beneath her feet and finally settled into something solid. George exhaled audibly, leaning close to whisper in her ear, "It's over." It wasn't truly over, of course. Trauma doesn't leave that easily. Healing isn't linear. But justice had a face and it had a name. Candace Doyle was escorted out in handcuffs, her pride stripped away, her lies no longer able to infect anyone else. The echo of her footsteps faded in the hallway as the press cameras snapped relentless shots, flashes illuminating the exhaustion etched into our faces. I stepped outside with Lisa and George, the chill of the late afternoon brushing against my skin. The sky was painted in muted shades of orange and gray, the kind of light that made everything look softer, less threatening. The city hummed around us, unaware of the quiet victories and battles waged behind closed doors. Lisa turned to me, eyes glistening with the tears she hadn't yet allowed herself to cry. "Nina," she whispered, her voice fragile but determined. "Thank you for everything. I don't even know how to begin." I hugged her tightly, feeling the tremor in her body, the weight of everything she had endured. "You don't have to. You survived it. That's enough." George placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. He had been there in the moments I couldn't be, in the early panic, in the hospital rooms, and in the quiet hours when Lisa's grief threatened to consume her. "We're moving forward," he said softly, as if willing the words to make the future real. The next weeks were a blur of recovery, therapy sessions, and rebuilding trust in a world that had been fractured. Dr. Elise Warren, the trauma specialist we had found, became a constant presence. Some days Lisa's smile was small, tentative, fragile. Other days they were brighter, stronger, the kind that reminded me why it was worth fighting through every sleepless night and every pang of despair. George and Lisa worked together to reclaim what had been lost. They organized their home, painted the nursery in soft shades of green and gold, and filled it with the warmth and love that had been absent from their lives for so long. I was there, silently observing, helping with logistics, cooking meals, sometimes just sitting and listening. Months passed. Slowly, Lisa began to regain her sense of self. She laughed more, spoke more freely, and allowed herself to dream again. And then came the day we had all been waiting for, an adoption finalized, a chance to bring Sophie into their lives permanently. The adoption center was quiet, intimate. The caseworker, a kind woman with warm eyes, handed Lisa a small, wrapped bundle. She held Sophie cautiously, reverently, as if the baby's very existence were a miracle she had been waiting her whole life to see. Sophie's tiny fingers curled around Lisa's thumb, anchoring her to a reality that had been so tenuous for months. George and Lisa stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back, a protective presence, a reminder that they were no longer alone in the fight. I watched them, feeling a deep, bittersweet ache. We had all walked through fire, and now, for the first time, the heat had softened, leaving only the smoldering embers of resilience. Sophie's dark, curious eyes blinked up at all of us. Lisa whispered her name softly, almost reverently, "Sophie." She had been chosen carefully, legally, officially, finally hers. The relief on her face was palpable, an exhale of months of fear and uncertainty. I crouched beside them, placing my hand over Lisa's. "She's yours," I said quietly. "You both made it through." The courtroom verdict, the hospital scares, the legal battles, they were all behind us. But the memories lingered, haunting the edges of our lives, reminders of fragility and resilience intertwined. Healing was still ongoing, but it had a rhythm now, a pulse, a life beyond the chaos. That night, back at their home, we sat together in the living room. Sophie slept in Lisa's arms, breathing softly, a tiny heartbeat echoing in the quiet space. George read aloud from a children's book, his voice steady and warm. Lisa rested her head against my shoulder, her eyes finally able to close without fear. I realized then that revenge, justice, and healing were not about punishment alone. They were about reclaiming control over the narrative, about ensuring that lies and negligence could no longer dictate the course of our lives. They were about creating spaces where trust could grow again, where innocence could be restored, and where love could thrive unthreatened. Sometimes, I caught myself watching Lisa and George, Sophie nestled between them, and felt the weight of the past loosen ever so slightly. The shadows lingered, but they no longer dominated the light. The clinic's name had been erased from the city's map. Families had been warned, the perpetrators had faced accountability, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future that was unbroken. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A cup of tea in the morning, a soft conversation before bed, a shared laugh at an unexpected moment. It was the small gestures that mattered, the subtle reclaiming of life, the ability to wake without the weight of fear pressing against the chest. One evening, Lisa invited me to sit with her on the porch. The sky had turned a deep violet, stars beginning to pierce the fading light. Sophie rested in her lap, her tiny fingers reaching for the air, exploring the vastness of a world that had once seemed dangerous and unpredictable.
"Do you ever think about it?" Lisa asked, her voice low, almost hesitant. "About everything that happened? About what we lost?" I nodded slowly. "Every day," I admitted. "But I also think about what we gained. About truth. About resilience. About you holding Sophie now." She smiled faintly, a genuine curve of lips that carried the weight of survival and triumph. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You didn't have to do it alone, and you never will again." The night deepened around us, a blanket of quiet and stars. I held my sister's hand, feeling the pulse of life, the rhythm of recovery. Sophie stirred slightly, letting out a tiny gurgle, and Lisa laughed softly, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. In that moment, I understood that the story we had lived, the lies, the fear, the deception, hadn't broken us. It had sharpened us. It had taught us the value of vigilance, the power of advocacy, and the unyielding strength that comes from protecting those you love. And as the stars shone overhead, I knew that the darkness we had endured was not the end. It was merely the crucible from which light could finally emerge. Families weren't defined by perfection, nor by the pain they endured. They were defined by the courage to face truth, to protect the innocent, and to rise from devastation with hearts intact. And Sophie blinked up at the night sky, unaware of the battles that had preceded her arrival. And in that innocent gaze, I felt the quiet triumph of everything we had fought for. The reclamation of life, love, and hope, finally ours to hold, to protect, and to nurture. The past had been brutal, but the present was ours, and the future, fragile yet luminous, was just beginning.